Chapter 6. The M Word. Just to be clear, I can't see you. I don't think I need to point that out. You must already know how books work, or at least you must realize I'm not skulking around whatever place you're at. You could be reading this anywhere. A library, a bedroom, a scary haunted forest, a bank you're in the middle of robbing, or even on the can. And it won't change my opinion of you because I didn't see it. Rest assured that I don't have the first idea who you are, and as a rule, no book can identify the person reading it. I mean, it's a rule that has been broken. I'll never forget the time I was on the receiving end of an eavesdropping book, but I promise not to pass that discourtesy on to you. Remember our moral: spying is bad. That said, I may have noticed a few things about you, embarrassing things that would be impolite to point out, but since we're in this together and I need you to trust me, I'm going to come clean about them. To begin with, I know you can read. I also know you're young, so young that you've probably never heard of me, which is a good thing. This story isn't about me, and I wouldn't want my uncomfortable history to keep you from enjoying it. I also know that, as you read this, you are searching very hard for the M word. Now I've got your attention. Were you wondering when I would finally get around to the forbidden subject? Is that why you started reading this book? There's no point trying to hide it. You like books with the M word. You like them better than any other kind of book. You take a sick, sinister delight in reading about something which cannot be mentioned in polite conversation. I can tell from that twist of your lips as you fight to keep from smiling. It makes you look guilty. I'm sorry to disappoint, but the M word is not in this story at all. And it should be obvious why. This story actually happened, meaning that anything you read in this story is something that could happen in real life and has happened before, even if it hasn't happened for a good long while. As such, you shouldn't bother searching for the M word. It ain't here. That is not to say, however, that in this story you won't encounter anything unbelievable. Depending on how much of a skeptic you are, that may have already happened. If not, then it's about to happen. Regardless, nowhere in these pages will you encounter a topic as absurd as magic. Ahem. The worst day of Skylar's life started with a chill that snapped him awake like a mousetrap. Blinking the dew out of his eyes, he sat up in a field buttered with river mist, at least a 10-minute walk away from his house. He'd been carried out in the night. His mother's orders, you understand. His upcoming test had caught Shiandra quite by surprise, and she needed the house to herself to get everything ready. So instead of waking up to the sound of logs cracking in the fireplace and the smell of hot oat cakes sizzling in a stone pan, Skylar rose like a zombie out of the swirling early morning vapors. He was sore and hungry in the way that only a growing boy can be. The harshness of the outdoors came at him from a million directions, putting his whole body on high alert. I can't fault him for feeling persecuted. Naturally, there would be no more going easy on the little boy. Men did things the hard way. They built their own houses, ate rocks, and walked barefoot to their chores. And they did it in the snow, under a blazing sun, uphill there, uphill back again, with 3 hands tied behind their backs, all without complaining. Today was just Skylar's first taste of maturity. It tasted like butt nuggets. Summer found him in the pasture after dawn. She'd bolted from her mother's pen as soon as Duncan opened it and did not slow down until she had her friend. She gave him a gentle headbutt and hopped, inviting him to play. Skylar looked down. He would not hop. But Summer had an even better idea. She ran circles around him, daring the boy to catch her. His hands drooped. They would not catch. But that was no problem because Summer had found a long stick. Skylar would never turn down a tug-of-war. He always wanted to play. But Skylar just stared at the stick like he didn't even know what it was for. And I'm afraid a baby kine elk doesn't know how to handle such monumental levels of glum. The only explanation you could have given her was that Skylar was sick, but she hadn't been alive long enough to know what sick was. Defeated, she crawled into his lap and sucked his fingers, trying to draw the warmth out of him. Thunkin almost stopped himself from interrupting them. After some hours, he found Skylar scratching the dirt with Summer's stick, looking for worms. The baby watched, head cradled in the boy's arm. A sensitive father would have let them be. "You need to wash," Thunkin said. Skylar kept scratching. "There's no way out of this, so you might as well make the best of it." He hesitated. "You'll be glad you did." "Why do I have to?" Skylar said, not taking his eyes off the dirt. "Because you need it. Because life is hard, and you are weak." The father reached down to smooth his son's buttercream-colored hair. "When you pass the test and wake up tomorrow, you'll be as strong as any man in this village." "And if I fail?" Duncan shook his head. "No one has failed their judgment night in centuries." "I could." Skylar finally looked up. "You know I could. You know what I'm like." He shrugged. "So what happens if I do?" His father sighed. "I guess if that happens, Ice blue eyes rolled around in the man's head. "I'll throw Mix and Torta into the creek." Skylar snorted. "You can't do that." "No, but I can throw you into the creek, and I will if you don't wash right now." Skylar frowned at his father. If you had the power to look backwards through time and see this moment play out, the resemblance would amaze you. Thunkin was a taller, stronger, and rougher version of Skylar. He had given his boy the tan skin and extra height that marked his family, and maybe some of his mountain-bred grit. That Skylar had never noticed these things was only natural. Today, more than ever before, he didn't feel like he deserved to be his father's son. Why was no one allowed to tell me? I would have believed you. I would have tried to understand. Thunkin shrugged. "I reckon I could tell you everything and you still wouldn't understand. You'll have questions after today, and I won't have answers. But as you get older, everything will slowly make sense. Our village may be small, but its secrets are the biggest in the world." "The whole world?" "Yes. Now throw yourself in some water, you smell of kine elk." What Skylar did for the next hour is frankly none of your business, although Summer certainly thought it was hers. She nearly climbed into the half-barrel Skylar used for washing, but with some force was kept outside, standing as nearby as possible. There's not much to say about taking a bath in an early Iron Age civilization. Sure, it's deadlier than taking a bath right now. The mere act of baring his bottom could have struck Skylar down with a case of pneumotyphoid diphtheria bubonic tuberculosis scurvy pox. But once you get past that, the routine was rather basic and little different from how you hopefully wash yourself every day. Skylar's father had cut a block of cork sponge for the boy to scrub himself with, and he set to work scraping the stink off him. After far too short a time, Skylar heard his mother calling. He scowled. He couldn't get a moment to himself today, and the shadows of the mountains already stretched like black taffy across the landscape. Stewing, Skylar lifted himself from the half-barrel and slogged naked back to the house, Summer following close behind until Sheandra shut the door in the baby's face. "I can't believe how poorly you washed," Skylar's mother greeted him. With each glance, she found a new reason to roll her eyes, as if every part of her son had discovered a way to offend her. Still, he'd been allowed inside and was shown the new set of clothes she had worked all day to finish. Pulling out a stone comb, she fought his hair as he dressed himself. "Such a chore," she muttered. "Such a star-blasted inconvenience." Not ugly enough to properly scowl at her children, Sheandra had nonetheless mastered the stern tone required by all good mothers to shame their offspring into silence. "You want to know why this is happening? I'll tell you why," she sniffed, placing a hand over her heart. "It's because our chicken coop is so much better than any of the neighbors' ones." Skylar cocked his head. Of all the explanations he'd heard for why this was happening, he'd never expected to encounter something more ridiculous than, "You changed fate by stepping on a toadstool." Sheandra continued. I told your father it would lead to hard feelings, putting a proper roof on the thing, and a real swinging door with a star-forsaken latch. And now the whole neighborhood hates us. No one else has such a nice chicken coop, so they had to punish me. Real tears welled up in her eyes. Tightening the laces on the front of his new shirt, Skylar made a startling discovery. You put buttons inside. 4 buttons, to be exact, 1 at each corner of the shirt's back. Thin and made of copper, they rested easily against Skylar's skin. They weren't exactly uncomfortable, but he couldn't imagine why they had been put there. Oh, hush, Sheandra spat. The important thing is that your father has ruined all our lives yet again. She kept combing his hair long after it stopped being necessary. Skylar worked up the nerve to ask a question. Mother, what is Judgment Night? Tell me truly. Sheandra pulled an errant thread from Skylar's shirt. Well, if I had to put it as simply as possible, I would say it's a kind of magic. Ignore that. Magic? Skylar asked, incredulous. Yes, doubtlessly some kind of magic. Ignore that. You mean like the things old Torta does? The comb snapped through Skylar's hair hard enough to uproot some strands. He flinched. I forbid you from mentioning that horrible witch, Sheandra said. Such a rude hag. She practically broke into our house to tell me you would be tested, and she was not sorry about it. She better not think we'll be on friendly terms after this, just because her grandniece is marrying my Jim. The new trousers fit snugly around the waist and loose around the legs, precisely the right fashion for a growing boy in a farming village. Skylar gave up on fishing for information. His poor scalp smarted from all the attention it had gotten. His old shoes completed the outfit, and he looked remarkably fresh for someone living in the Dark Ages. Hello, Mom, Jimothy blurted, strolling through the front door like it wasn't even there. He was still wearing his good vest, which he'd needed for giving a house tour to his future in-laws. And I'd tell you all about that, except this isn't Jimothy's story, and some things are even less interesting than taking a bath. The convenience of not having to change clothes from one activity to the next seemed to bolster the young man's spirits, and he kissed his mother on the cheek before settling in. She put buttons inside my shirt, Skylar complained. Get used to it, Pipsqueak, Jimothy replied. They'll be in all your shirts for the rest of your life. Skylar blinked. That had been an answer to a question he hadn't asked, and he didn't know what to think of it. Eat this, Skylar's mother said, handing him a hard slice of toast slathered in beef jelly. But lean forward, don't let any crumbs fall on you. Skylar eagerly broke the toast between his teeth, remembering how hungry he was. But he did not take his eyes off his brother, who smiled at him like a creep. Skylar's family was keeping something from him, and trying to distract him from how strangely they were behaving, which only made everything more obviously strange. Over the past day, he'd been so upset about being forced into this unannounced test that he'd never taken a moment to feel suspicious about it. He couldn't avoid that anymore. Wasn't there something grim and suspect about this whole arrangement? He didn't have the words to properly accuse his family of anything sinister, but right now they seemed too casual, like people in a park looking deliberately away from a panhandler. Kind of magic? He thought. And he should have added, that certainly doesn't belong in this story, and there must be a completely different explanation that wouldn't make the handsome narrator of this book a liar. But instead of thinking that, he worried. In this period of history, the M-word was not beloved and admired. The kinds of stories it appeared in were not upbeat, fanciful tales where wishes got granted and people lived happily ever after. Nor were they thoughtful, important stories about the danger of dabbling in powers too great for mortals. No, the only stories Skylar had ever heard about the M-word were dark, awful things. Magic was the power of the dead, and it pooled in dead places, like open graves and ruined castles. To use it, a person needed to be possessed by hundreds, maybe thousands of hateful souls hungering for a human host. To stop them from devouring you, you had to feed them a stream of new victims, swelling their numbers until you were something of a monster yourself. It was like the world's worst entry-level job, where you had to work for years as a serial killer before you got promoted to wizardhood. That couldn't be what Judgment Night meant, could it? A pang of unease started to twist in Skylar right around the time his father walked through the door. Thunkin had finished putting all the animals back in their pens with plenty of feed. He glittered with sweat and was covered in straw, and with the sun already behind the mountains, Skylar's test could begin at any moment. That was almost a problem. But Thunkin used the one superpower all dads have, being ready to leave before everyone else. After 5 minutes of cleaning up, he warped forward to the point where his hair was combed, his body was washed, his best clothes were freshly pressed and put on, and he had somehow been waiting more than an hour for everyone else to get ready. I don't know how it works, but dads have done it since the dawn of time, so I'll leave well enough alone. And all that hurry, which had kept these people on pins and needles for an entire day, gave way to a long wait. The stars came out, and the family passed an hour without words. Skylar's mother met each of their eyes in the silence, and his father kept turning his own sights on the door. Whatever was supposed to happen was not happening yet, and Skylar let himself hope that maybe the whole thing had been called off. Skylar's growing unease was the second strongest feeling in the room. His brother's boredom and his mother's resentment couldn't even come close. But the joy in his father's heart surpassed them all. When Thunkin looked at the people around him, he saw something he almost couldn't believe. The family he had wished for his whole life and had somehow gotten. He remembered the years he'd spent wondering if a night like this would ever happen to him. Both his boys were growing up. One had found a bride, and the other was about to become a man. But they would all still be together forever. He sat down between his sons and hooked an arm around them both, locking them to his sides. It was the happiest moment of his life. For one heartbeat, Skylar felt safe. It was as if the old times had returned and he was just a lucky boy with good people to look after him. Did they really expect him to give that up? To become another Jimothy? Who would be Skylar then? He might not be good at a lot of things, or even a single thing, but he felt sorry for all the times he'd messed up. Didn't that count for anything? That idea was killed with the loudest knock he had ever heard. A battering ram would have been more subtle. Skylar jumped, but the rest of the family calmly rose. Thunkin strode to the door and pushed it open with one hand, letting in the strangest of sights. Curling white shrouds rode the air, rippling from the bodies of two spectral figures standing in front of the house. The shape of their faces barely cut through the clinging fabric, skull ridges outlined by filmy veils. Strange symbols had been embroidered over their eyes, and each lifted a candle lantern in one cloth-wrapped hand. Tall and pale, they looked like tombstones that had been planted outside Skylar's door. "The world ends tonight," one declared in a voice that filled the valley. "You will walk with us, or you will die." Skylar's family offered him toward the wraiths. He followed them, and the rest followed him, leaving an empty and lightless house behind.